In this video, I'm going to be giving my thoughts and review on Zack Snyder's Justice League. This is a highly anticipated movie, a movie that fans have been anticipating ever since the original Justice League came out in November of 2017. The reason why is because the director, Zack Snyder, director of Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman, was not able to fully complete his version of Justice League. He had to leave halfway through the production due to tragic reasons involving his daughter. They brought in Joss Whedon to finish the movie. As a result, the movie was kind of like a Frankenstein, kind of half and half of a movie, half of Zack Snyder, half of Whedon. The parts that were Whedon were clearly Whedon, and for that reason, a lot of the DC fans did not really, and people that were fans of Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman, I should say, they were not fans of the movie just because it was not consistent with Zack Snyder's overall vision and what he set up in Batman vs. Superman. Me personally, I'm not exactly a worshiper of Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman. I think they're both very flawed movies, have their good moments, but are very, very flawed. So I actually thought the Justice League movie, to be honest, I thought it was okay. It was a pretty basic sort of team-up superhero movie that had some fun moments, but it was missing sort of probably like a good story and especially a good villain to make it the epic that they wanted to have it. You know, it was no Marvel movie. It wasn't even, or no Avengers movie. It wasn't even as good as, say, like Age of Ultron. It wasn't even on that level. So with this movie, the Snyder Cut, fans have wanted it for years. They finally gave Snyder the green light to do something with HBO Max. The thing about it, though, is that with this Snyder Cut, they essentially had to go in and really redo a whole bunch of scenes just because they didn't have a completed version. They actually had to put money into doing this. So it's a pretty amazing, this whole sort of like concept about this movie. But that's why people were anticipating it, because it's consistent with Zack Snyder's vision. So with this movie, what did I think about it after watching the nearly 4-hour runtime of Zack Snyder's Justice League? Well, I'll start with the good. And this is going to sound like a backhanded compliment just because I said I wasn't exactly a big fan of Man of Steel and BVS, Batman vs. Superman. I thought they were okay. I'll say that this movie, the good, is that it is consistent with the vision from Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman, meaning that it is Zack Snyder's vision. You know, with Batman vs. Superman, that movie had a whole lot of it that was set up for the next movie, the Justice League movie, and that was completely missing in the Whedon cut, where he cut out a whole bunch of stuff. With this movie, the Zack Snyder's Justice League, he includes a lot of the stuff that was in Batman vs. Superman, the story setups. So mainly Darkseid, he was completely absent in the Whedon cut. He's in this one. He's not the main villain. That's still Steppenwolf, but he's still a presence in the movie, and you do see him. He sort of continues off of those visions that Batman had that was completely absent in the Whedon cut. Just overall stuff, like including changing the color palette to sort of the color palette that was in Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman. That's sort of like a unsaturated, sort of colorless kind of palette. That's what he had in this one, so at least that's sort of consistent with that vision. And that also meant that he completely took out the stuff in the Joss Whedon Justice League that was clearly from Joss Whedon. You know, the main thing mainly that people point out is the jokes. You know, the "do you bleed" thing, and then Batman's all like, "Yep, something's definitely bleeding." And the joke that Clark's mom makes with Lois about her being sort of a thirsty reporter. You know, stuff like that that's clearly from Whedon, that sort of humor that he put into his first two Avengers movies. That stuff is completely taken out. And, you know, it makes sense because that's stuff that's clearly not from Zack Snyder. I mean, even watching the movie in the theaters, I was like, yep, that stuff in the original Justice League, watching in the theaters, I was like, yeah, that stuff is definitely not from Joss Whedon. So for his Snyder Cut, I think it was a good thing that he took that out. It also meant that one advantage this movie has, that it's coming out after Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. The original Justice League came out before those two movies. That mainly showed that they didn't know quite how to do sort of a large scale kind of villain like this. They got the example from Thanos, and what happened here is that they made Steppenwolf a much better sort of presence in the movie. You know, in the original Justice League, his look was just kind of like sort of his scenes were just kind of like his dialogue were Here, even though it's still flawed, and I'll get to that later on, they did a better job of making him more of a presence in the movie and sort of a better villain. I mean, for one, he definitely looks cooler. You know, sort of his armor has got this cool, like, kind of unique aesthetic to it. Like, the sort of functions behind it, it's, like, really interesting to look at, even though it's essentially just a big onesie made out of knives. But essentially, Steppenwolf overall, with some of the extra scenes that they gave him, he was a better presence in the movie. The next thing that I'll say that was better is that this was a very different movie from the original Justice League. So that means they definitely put a lot into this Snyder Cut in terms of giving people their quote-unquote money's worth, even though if you have HBO Max, this is free. But they definitely made it a much better movie. I mean, to do some simple math, the original Justice League was only about 2 hours long, which isn't really long enough, I feel, for an epic that like something on the scale of Justice League should be. This movie, not including the credits, is 3 hours and 53 minutes long. So that means you are essentially getting 2 hours extra of extra content. And the majority of stuff, or a lot of the stuff in it, is actually stuff that does add some more depth to the story. I think the best thing they added was giving more depth and actually showing Cyborg's backstory. Him sort of coming up, sort of his background as a football player, the tragedy involving him and his mom, and there were some other scenes between him and his father that actually added more to his story and made him more of a character. There's also a really great scene where Superman gets his black suit and you get sort of a voiceover with both of his fathers, his his Krypton father and his earthly father. That was a really well done scene. There was some extra stuff also, like Diana visiting the burning temple after it gets lit on fire by the Amazons. Just little stuff here and there were nice touches that sort of added to the depth in the movie, and they were overall nice, welcome additions. Of course, there was also a good dose of new action that really did spice things up in the movie. They essentially actually redid pretty much the entire final battle. I mean, that was amazing. There was only like one noticeable moment that was kept from the Whedon cut, but other than that, they completely redid it, so that was pretty impressive. They also gave us other stuff, like that extended flashback fight that involved Darkseid and the Amazons and the, the Atlanteans and the Green Lanterns. They really extended that fight. They extended Steppenwolf's fight with the Amazons, and they actually showed the scene where Steppenwolf goes to Atlantis and has that fight with the Atlanteans to get the mother box. So that was cool how they added a whole bunch of new action scenes to really spice things up. Even fights that did remain largely the same, Zack Snyder definitely added his own touch to those scenes, like Wonder Woman's opening fight scene where she's saving the hostages in the bank. That scene is essentially still the same scene with how it plays out, but he added his own touch where he changed the score, he changed the color palette to that sort of gray color palette thing, he added more slow-mo, he added some curse words, he added a little bit more violence. He definitely added his own touch to that scene to make it sort of his own. The only sort of main fight that remained largely untouched was the tunnel fight scene where they're all fighting Steppenwolf in that sort of underground tunnel or warehouse or whatever. That scene was essentially the same thing, with just some little stuff removed that was like non-action, but the rest of the fight was pretty much exactly the same. So the movie definitely gives you your money's worth if you're looking for something that's a different experience from the original Justice League. They keep the stuff in there that does work, and some of the talking scenes like the transition scenes that sort of move like the story along, but a lot of the aesthetics, like in terms of the action, little stuff here and there in terms of removing the Whedonisms, they definitely make it its own movie. Zack Snyder made it his own movie. So the movie itself definitely gives you your money's worth if you're looking for a different experience from the original Justice League. Now, there was some stuff, though, that I thought was not so great. Some of the stuff was stuff that continued from the first Justice League. There was some stuff that Zack Snyder changed. In terms of the stuff that Zack Snyder changed, it was really just more so that he added is sort of the Snyderisms. Zack Snyder's Snyderisms is stuff like the music stuff that he adds, like every scene, the slow-mo. To me, a lot of that stuff was really overdone. Like in one of the scenes towards the beginning, Lois Lane is just getting some coffee, and they turn it into sort of like a big music video. That's her getting coffee in slow motion, her walking in slow motion. So like, oh man, this is just like so overdone. And this was at the beginning of the movie too. It's just like, oh God, please tell me that the movie isn't going to be essentially all of this. Thankfully, the movie doesn't get that extreme as it goes along. But just stuff like that, Lois Lane just getting some coffee. It's like, what the hell is this? Why is this in slow-mo? Why is it a music video? There's also some other stuff like the Flash. There's a sequence where he saves a girl from a car crash. It's really sort of like even though it's kind of cool, it's really sort of like an overblown scene that's like too much to really get to the point. And in all honesty, it's kind of meaningless with where it is in the movie and how it sort of like relates to the story. So that scene I felt like was a little overdone. It was one of those sort of like classic Snyderisms. That's just a little too much, a little too overblown with something like say like Watchmen, where I think that was a big problem in that movie with just like a lot of the stuff was just like so like overdone and stuff like that. Also, there was sort of even though this is his stuff, this his cut, there was a lot of stuff that he removed that I felt like, I don't think he should have removed that. A lot of stuff that I'm guessing he didn't direct. I didn't like how he scrapped some of the team friction or team building moments, like that scene where Diana sort of pushes Bruce after she brings up after he brings up Trevor. Just little sort of tension moments like that. I'm like, why'd you cut that? That was actually a scene I really enjoyed from the first one. Sort of those like team friction moments to really like sort of make things difficult for them to form together as a team, or even stuff when they do come together, like that smile that Wonder Woman gives Batman after she saves him at the final battle. And that smile after like when he's in the Batmobile, he cuts that stuff out. Just little stuff here and there I felt like were nice moments that I wish he kept, and I was confused why he sort of like cut those out. I was also confused why this movie was divided into parts. It goes to like a black screen, it'll say part one, then after a certain amount of time it'll go to black screen, part two, all the way to the epilogue, where it'll actually say epilogue. And I understand that this movie was originally meant to be sort of like a series that was going to be sort of like a weekly thing. But then they ended up making the right decision, I feel, and just make it into one big movie. But if they're going to do that, I think like it was unnecessary, sort of divided into parts. That was kind of like, I'm not sure that was a great decision. It really didn't add anything. It was kind of meaningless. Also, with Superman, Superman was a big topic of criticism in the first Justice League, and it's sort of been a topic of criticism in sort of these new DC movies overall. For people looking for more Superman, I mean, it's essentially sort of the same thing it was in the original Justice League. It doesn't come in till around sort of like the same time. It doesn't really have a ton to do with the actual story besides just being a sort of like a gimmick to sort of save the day. Yeah, he gets a new suit, and that scene where he gets the new suit was really well done. But overall, just not a whole ton to Superman in this movie if you're looking for them to really sort of improve the character. And thankfully, there's no CGI mustache like disaster there was in the first Justice League. But overall, Superman just doesn't really have a ton to do in this one. Something that I'll say that is a criticism and a positive is the Joker scene. Without spoiling things, I'll just say I was really surprised when it came up. It came in an unexpected point in the movie based on my expectations. But what I'll say about the actual scene is that Jared Leto, the guy who portrays the Joker, obviously, and has gotten a lot of criticism after Suicide Squad, I'd say that he definitely redeemed himself in this one. Aesthetically, the look was definitely a lot better. They got rid of a lot of the stupid stuff, like sort of the teeth and sort of the tattoos and just like the fashion style. It was a lot better, his scene in this one. And just his portrayal was better in terms of generally the voice, the dialogue. They got rid of sort of the whole like gangster gimmicks. It was still good, even though they still got that weird laugh. That's kind of like, what kind of laugh is that? But overall, his portrayal in the scene itself, the dialogue, was a lot better. But I will say that my criticism that the scene really just does feel tacked on. It could literally be removed from the movie and it would not change a thing. And that was an issue with a lot of Batman vs. Superman, where a lot of that stuff, especially at the end of that movie and at the end of this movie, is just like set up for a sequel and has no bearing on the movie that you're currently watching. And speaking of the movie that you're currently watching, the movie was touted as like this R-rated experience. That's the same thing that the Batman vs. Superman, the Ultimate Edition was, where it was rated R. And that movie, I feel like actually gave you some, I guess you'll say some R-rated stuff in terms of a little bit more blood, some F-bombs here and there. But this movie is all like, really? This is rated R? They only dropped 2 F-bombs. One's at the very beginning of the movie. The other is literally towards the very end of the movie. And then maybe like one sort of like decapitation. But other than that, the sort of R rating really holds no like bearing over this movie. It's really sort of inconsequential because the movie is essentially still a PG-13 movie. And that'll lead me to my final comment, which isn't really a criticism of the movie, but it's more sort of like a criticism on the whole concept of the movie, is that yes, the movie I feel like was an improvement on the Whedon cut. There were some cool additions. It was consistent with the vision, Zack Snyder's vision from Batman vs. Superman, with the setup that was in that movie. But at the end of the day, what I'll say is, so what? The main issue that I see is that if Zack Snyder, say if he was able to fully complete his vision that he had when he was making Justice League the first time, it would have had the same issue that Batman vs. Superman had, where he framed sort of a 3-hour plus story that ends up being cut to pieces because it has to reach sort of a certain time limit, which would be like around like say like 2 hours and 20 minutes. That was the issue with Batman vs. Superman, where his story, like his full vision for that movie, it was like a 3-hour and 30-minute movie, the Ultimate Edition. And obviously they had to cut it down to where when they cut it down, the original theatrical version, the story was sloppy. It didn't make a whole ton of sense. There was like some story plot lines that really just didn't go anywhere, it felt like. And I was like, wow, what the hell was that? And so the Ultimate Edition made it make more sense. You know, this movie, it's just a ton of stuff, but you're like, how the hell would this have felt as sort of like a normal movie being in theaters? Like, the only way you could have done it is if it could have been split in two. But even when you watch this movie, it's like, I don't see how this could have been split in two. So I think the core issue is how Zack Snyder sort of frames these stories. You know, he's got to sort of work within a time limit or sort of a natural flow of a story. An example that I always use is the Avengers Infinity War, where you look at how big in scale that movie in terms of the characters, sort of the locations. Obviously, it's got a villain that needs a lot of development, but that movie, it's like only like 2 hours and 15 minutes movie, 15 minutes. I mean, that's amazing for a movie that scale and big in size. So, you know, I think at the end of the day, and sort of like it's kind of like with this movie, it's all like, well, it's not like this could have been in theater. So this is essentially like a fan project, a really cool fan project, but something that would never work as sort of like a normal movie. Because to try and sit through this all the way through was kind of like, oof. In one sitting, it's pretty like, oh god, that's a long thing to get through, even though it's got some cool stuff. But overall, despite like a lot of the criticisms, and I did say a lot, I think the main thing, the main positive behind this movie is that it is a different experience. You know, you get your money's worth in terms of you're getting essentially 2 hours extra of extra content. And even the scenes that are still the same, they essentially change them up a whole bunch, and Zack Snyder adds his own touch. So it's definitely worth it for that reason. And sort of I think the main things they did, which was mainly be sort of like a consistent sort of successor or natural successor to Batman vs. Superman, and continuing his vision, and little stuff here and there, like some more action, some better like aesthetics or stuff like that, little touches to the story, that like more scenes in between. I think overall that stuff worked in the movie's favor. So originally, like the first Justice League, I thought was fine or okay. I would have given it like a 6 or a 6.5 out of 10, maybe, probably closer to a 6. This movie, I think overall the experience for what it was in terms of the overall package, I would give it a 7.5 out of 10. You know, it's still flawed. It still has some of the same story issues as a Batman or I'd say the original Justice League, but overall the touches that they had were overall an improvement. And I think overall just the experience for what the movie was and what they pulled off and what they gave the fans. You know, something like this is unprecedented, to essentially sort of like redo a whole movie or essentially add 2 hours extra of content that people had never seen before. That's pretty amazing. So for that, I would give the movie a 7.5, really. Maybe it's closer to a 7, but it's in that range to where it is a good experience, to where if you were sort of are on the fence about watching it, it's got a whole bunch of stuff to where it's like, dude, just watch it just because it's an extra 2 hours extra of content right there. So that's why you should watch it. Something that's interesting, having seen the movie and wondering what's going to happen next, is that from a lot of DC fans, what was trending on Twitter is restore the Snyderverse. Because this movie sort of like teases a lot of the stuff that Zack Snyder or the future of DC was originally going to look like. And some of the stuff is really cool, and some of the stuff I actually kind of want to see. Like, I kind of want to see what his Justice League sequels would look like. I definitely want to see what that Batman Deathstroke movie was going to be. So there's a lot of cool stuff teased, especially towards the end of the movie. That's kind of like, man, I kind of want to see what that full Snyderverse would look like, even though obviously I have my mixed feelings on Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, and even Justice League overall. But sort of the stuff that it showed, man, I kind of would be interested in seeing how that all plays out. So overall, that's what you get from Zack Snyder's Justice League. So that'll do it for this video. If you made it to the end, thank you for watching.